So this is research numero dos. This research is by John Noel Moore, and his article is titled Practicing Poetry, Teaching to Learn and Learning to Teach. 10-step way to teach poetry. And I love me some steps because steps make the process of the process so much easier. As long as I hit those goal points, I have conquered the task. So I love steps. But this research journal starts with the question, why do we feel threatened by poetry? And the author expresses the amount of rules that some poetry has. And because of those rules, it tends to be hard to understand. Which is why I've officially decided my poems are going to be free verse, because I can't have rules during a process in which I'm fully becoming vulnerable with. I don't write poetry, and I need to start. With something that I can achieve, and that's free verse. So, the author Moore goes into following details as to why we should be teaching poetry, and this is a direct quote. It nurtures a love and appreciation for the sound and power of language. Poetry can help us see differently. It can help us understand ourselves and others and validate our human experiences. It enhances thinking skills, promotes personal connections, such as attributes, and deserves a closer look. So I want those. I want to be able to do those things within producing poetry. So let's begin with the idea of fear factor. That's the second subtitle within this journal. We are fearful of poetry because we were underprepared in our early years. For example, I was underprepared in high school, and this leads to, according to the author, this leads to teachers' perceived needs versus open requirements. So the teachers could assume that because poetry is on the simpler side and it requires less words, that the requirements are just easy to navigate for our students, which is false. If I was told to write a poem today, right now, I would struggle, and this is why I chose this as my genre choice project, because I need to be better at doing something I may not love and be uncomfortable with, because I'm going to teach it at some point. But to go back to the text, teachers perceived a need versus the open requirements. It's a discussion, an open discussion that needs to be placed in the classroom. The second fear factor, key takeaway, is we don't start simple. Some poetry units start with Shakespeare. Shakespeare's not simple. This author said a great way to conquer poetry is to start small and go harder and continue to develop until you get to complex poetry, which is why I'm really appreciative that I decided that my guide-along text during this process is free verse poetry from Jean Lee, because I would have a very difficult time if it was Shakespearean sonnets. Who doesn't love one sentence on a page? So the next thing as to why we feel threatened to producing poetry and to teach it is we need to learn how to write again. Like I said before in this process, I'm not a writer. I'm a reader. I'm an analyzer, but I don't write for pleasure unless it's in my diary, where it's my basic daily things that I've done. So, how do we learn how to write again? According to Moore, we need to place ourselves in writing scenarios. Lead yourself to inspiration. Openly and actively pursue writing, even if you don't want to. He also says to work with your friends, peers, coworkers, and show your work through even during the growing pains, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm showing you very rough and ugly poetry that honestly might not see the light of day because I'm not very confident in it. However, we are also told to try other ideas, actually read poetry, actually experience a poetry slam, watch it, listen, attend. I watch Elizabeth Acevedo read Poet-X before bed because I just enjoy it. It makes me feel good. So it's really good that before I even started nitpicking into this research, I was going to connect this to her. Now here's the fun part. Poetry Top 10 Action Plan. I love me some plans and some steps, especially within the classroom. I plan to use these within, if and when I teach poetry. Steps are easy to understand during the creative process for me, and I would hope that could be the same for my students that lack the creativity process that I lack as well. So, step number 1. Read great poetry. Wow. Check. Ask questions about that poetry. I annotate my poetry on the side with sticky notes, so you will see that in the slides following. Ask questions about what's going on, how does this connect to my life, how this connects to individuals I may know, and even if it doesn't connect to me, how could I use this in the future? So those are the big questions that the author is trying to make us become more aware of. Step 3, write a poem. Okay, you'll see my rough poem next slide. Step 4, read that poem to friends, colleagues, anyone. Read it to anyone. Show someone your poetry. I am going to read you the poem. It's going to be a video. Sadly, I won't be able to get live and in-person critiques, but actively reading your poetry aloud, giving it a voice, giving it momentum, fluidity, all those things are very important in this process. Borrow a poetry lesson. This is where it goes into more teaching poetry. So if I were to continue to teach myself poetry, I should follow a lesson plan, and I should do activities within that lesson plan that's going to influence me to either write more poetry or write better poetry. I'm going to go through the rest of the steps. They're more teaching based rather than doing based. So the first 5 are something that I'm going to practice more, and the other ones, I apologize, that's my AC if you can hear it. And the others are more what you would do as an educator. So for integrate what you know, don't reinvent the wheel. Take a method you already know. If you can do a sonnet and that's the one you decide to teach to your students, do a sonnet. Don't do a haiku. For personal reasons, don't do a haiku. But don't reinvent the wheel. Do something that makes you feel comfortable and confident, so that way your students can feel confident within their own personal abilities. Share your poems in the class. Show your students the process in which you endured. Show them the ugly part of poetry that you normally don't want to show. Show them the drafts. Show them the editing. All those things. Share your lesson for critiques. Kind of goes back to sharing your poetry for critiques. Same process. And the last step, number 10, is to publish. Like I said, maybe I could post my poetry on Twitter. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I will publish my poem so that people can see it and interpret it and love it for themselves. But this is the end of research number 2, and we will get to research number 3 and most likely tomorrow. But for you, it will be a video in 2.2 seconds. Bye!